My name is Jasmine Segura, and I'm the Policy and Communications Manager at E4FC, Educators for Fair Consideration. And I'll be your moderator for today's closing panel. So our remarkable speakers today are going to be discussing the current state of immigration reform. I know we have talked a little bit about it in the previous workshops, but I think it'll be great to hear from all three speakers about what's happening currently, what are some of the opportunities and challenges that we should expect to see this year, and then also some very concrete ideas. I would really want to challenge our speakers to give us ideas on how we can personally get involved and really make a difference in moving forward in immigration reform, but also just a much larger, really getting involved in bringing about justice for undocumented young people and their families. So this is how we're going to work the panel today. I will briefly introduce our speakers, and all of you guys can find their full bios in your folder. I really encourage you to read them. They're amazing and really, really, it's long. And we have also prepared some questions for our speakers that will really help us begin the discussion, and I promise to get you all in time. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker to my left. So Ju Hung is current research assistant at Harvard University, working on National Undocumented Research Project, a study that seeks to understand the effects of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, on the everyday lives of undocumented young people. Ju came to the United States from South Korea at the age of 11 and grew up in San Francisco Bay Area. He graduated from University of California, Berkeley, go Bears, where he studied political science and became the first undocumented student government senator in UC Berkeley history. Ju is currently pursuing his master's degree in public administration at San Francisco State University, and he is also that brave man that interrupted President Obama late last year and really challenged a president on his record number of deportations. I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about that experience. To the left of Ju, we have Arti Kohli. Arti is currently leading a project on immigration reform and the immigrant vote at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. She's an expert on federal immigration laws and policies, particularly as they relate to low-income and undocumented immigrants. In the past year, Arti analyzed and conducted advocacy on pending immigration reform legislation in Congress with various national organizations, including the National Immigration Law Center and the Emerson Collective. Prior to starting her own consulting practice, she was the director of immigration policy at the Warren Institute of Berkeley School of Law. So thank you, Arti, and welcome. And last but not least, we have Jose Antonio Vargas. Jose Antonio is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, filmmaker, and the founder of Define American, a campaign that seeks to elevate the conversation around immigration in America. In June 2011, the New York Times Magazine published a groundbreaking essay he wrote in which he revealed and chronicled his life in America as an undocumented immigrant, stunning media and political circles and attracting worldwide coverage. A year later, he appeared on the cover time of magazine internationally with fellow undocumented immigrants as part of a follow-up cover story. Since then, he has testified at the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on immigration reform and has written and directed Documented, a documentary feature film on his undocumented experience. And I believe there's a showing coming up on Monday. So I really want to welcome also Jose Antonio. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So as you can hear from their bios, our panelists really bring a very broad and deep understanding of immigration reform, not only from their professional experience, but also from personal experience. And I think that they can speak to the inhumane and devastating aspects of our broken immigration system. So we really feel that these are the voices that we should be hearing from today to talk about the current state of immigration reform. So welcome you all. So just to set the stage, I think throughout the whole day we've been talking a little bit about some significant victories that have happened locally, statewide, and nationally in absence of immigration reform. So the recent victories like Deferred Action, the California Dream Act really are a direct result of the leadership and braveness of students or undocumented folks like Ju and Jose Antonio and others that have come out and really have highlighted the devastating effects of immigration reform. So because and through that effort and through that organizing, I think we're closer to immigration reform than we've ever been. During the summer of last year, we had the Senate introduce their version of comprehensive immigration reform, and the House has failed to do the same thing, but I think that we're definitely moving forward, and we're closer than ever. So with that, I'm going to begin our discussion by asking Artie if you can kind of give us your personal take on what was 2013 look like for, what did it look like for undocumented young people and their families, and what are the main takeaways that we should take from last year?
Okay, so 2013 was a landmark year. I know that we didn't get to the final goal line by getting legislation passed, but I think it was an amazing moment for undocumented students and their families. The fact that the Senate passed a bipartisan bill, I understand that there's a lot of controversial pieces to it, but a bill that had a dream provision, that had no upper age limit, that had put dreamers who had already been deported, they would be able to apply for legalization. You know, a lot of pieces of it that were had never before been seen was amazing. And the fact that I think everyone universally acknowledged that without the activism and the daily work that so many dreamers have put in, it wouldn't have happened. You know, I started working in DC in the late 90s, and there were great advocates there, but there were no undocumented people who were advocating for themselves. And that, I think, has just been a sea change in DC and across the country. So as you mentioned, you know, the Senate passed the bill, the House wasn't able to move on anything, but I think, you know, we will see what's going to happen in 2014. Already, Speaker Boehner has said he's going to introduce principles. We feel like it's going to happen, you know, the principles will be introduced fairly soon. They're probably going to be vague and broad, but that's, you know, the fact that he has committed to even doing that is more than what he was doing last year. He's also hired a staff person named Becky Talent, who is an expert on immigration issues. She worked at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And the fact that, and you know, you're like, well, that's nice, you know, he has a staffer who can work on immigration, but it actually is a really big indication that he wants to take some control over the issue, which right now, the senior staff that's been controlling this issue has been from the Judiciary Committee. And the House Judiciary Committee Republicans have been basically adamantly against anything positive for undocumented immigrants. And the fact that you have someone who can come and is senior to them, who can be a decision maker, it's a major thing.
Yeah, so I think taking it a step back too, I mean, that's a great indicator that we're moving forward on immigration reform, but I think I want to pose to our panelists if they can talk about what do we mean by immigration reform when we talk about comprehensive immigration reform. So obviously the Senate proposed its versions, but I really want to give the panelists an opportunity to expand on that. What does immigration reform mean to you? And how does the Senate bill sort of differ from your idea of what immigration reform means?
First of all, I want to begin by saying, please do not heckle me while I'm speaking. It is very rude and disrespectful.
Ju, this is why I agreed to be here. Why do you think I'm here? I'm going to heckle you.
And I just wanted to clear that I did not interrupt President Obama alone. There's other courageous Asian undocumented immigrant youth and young adults are with me, and they're here today. If you could raise your hand, There you go. Acknowledge yourself. Thank you. And I was able to do it because of other courageous undocumented youth spoke out and shared their stories and risking their lives to fighting for justice. And I was inspired by it, and had no other choice but compelled to tell the truth to President Obama. And for me, immigration reform means providing a pathway of citizenship for 11.5 million undocumented immigrants in this country. And to me, immigration reform means to reunite with my family. And to me, immigration reform means protecting the rights of our community and treating them with human dignity and respect. And I will continue to pressure both President Obama and Congress to pass a fair and comprehensive immigration reform in this country. Thanks.
Ju, are you running for office?
Eventually.
If I do, please do not heckle me. That's all I'm asking.
I want to add to that a little bit. I may say something that's a little awkward, but I'm just going to go ahead with it. I think, so I've done about 190 events in 40 states in 2.5 years. I've traveled this country like a crazy person. And I think if there's one thing that I've concluded from speaking not only to the choir, because we are here, the choir, but to the people who have something against me because I'm undocumented, that I'm gay, and I look like this, and they don't know what the hell to think of it, like that kind of thing. I've concluded that most people don't know what CIR is. They have no idea. I mean, we say these terms as if somebody has a glossary somewhere, they can just look them up, right? I think we need to, at the end of the day, absolutely we need bills to pass. I will say now that I was never for the Senate immigration bill to begin with, but that because everybody seemed to think that we had to be for something, then we were gonna, yes, let's support that. Let's support what the Senate passed, even though it had all these atrocious provisions. But I think we have to start thinking of this as less of a legislative battle and really more like a liberation movement, right? In which we are in charge of our own narratives, in which we, in our own towns, in our own schools, in our own communities, right, insist not just on dignity, but on just pure accountability and representation. And I think, it's interesting because look, like we are, as somebody who used to be a political reporter, we are entering 2 big elections. The midterm elections, which is happening. This is precisely why the House wants to move as quickly as it does, right? We have a very small window here before Hillary starts the Hillary thing, and they run for president for 2016. And I think a lot of what's going to happen is really going to depend on states. I think, California is setting an example for the driver's licenses bill and the Trust Act and the DREAM Act. In New York, where I live part-time, the fact that there isn't even a driver's licenses bill or a DREAM Act. We actually just had a really good meeting with the de Blasio people. I think Mayor de Blasio in New York is going to take some leadership on this. And I intend to, part of my strategy this coming year is how do we get even more comfortable being uncomfortable, right? In going to places that we really need to be, right? And for that, having some Tea Party events, making sure this film that I finish, parts of it are in Alabama and Iowa, and I'm more than happy to go back to those states and kind of put our issue in the laps, on the laps of the very people, not only who are in charge of legislation, but also, quote unquote, everyday ordinary Americans. And that's why, the last thing I want to say is, this is why I find this whole conference, the leadership of Kathy Jin and E4FC trying to find a space for educators. You guys, we need more educators, teachers, principals, counselors to step up, and come out with us. Why do you do what you do, right? Because this year, there's going to be some things that are going to happen in the next few weeks that's going to make some news. about even more support for dreamers, and we're going to need educators to insist that these are our kids, right? These are our kids. And that's going to be really important.
Thank you. I think you two kind of allotted to this a little bit, but I really wanted to go back to the issue of citizenship. I think Ju mentioned immigration reform really means a pathway to citizenship, and so Jose, like you mentioned, House Republicans are expected to drop principles on immigration reform in the next couple of weeks. So I wanted to hear what you have to say when we're told that we're asking for too much. Is citizenship asking for too much?
No. That's why we have a campaign called Define American, not Define Immigrant. And you know, you're hearing a lot, and my biggest worry here as somebody who's, you know, who was a journalist, I guess I am still a journalist, is I think we're kind of getting lost in the, like, a special path, an earned path. And we got to be really careful here to make sure that we're on the same page when we talk about this. You know, at the end of the day, you have to become, you know, your status has to be legalized, right? You have to be in status to qualify to be an American citizen or to be in path for that. So I think sometimes there's some wordings that are really worrying me, and RT, I would love to get your thoughts on that, because I think some of the journalists are, I think we're confused. There's a lot of confusion, I think, don't you think?
Yeah, it's not about a special path,
yes,
but you have to have some way, some opportunity, some road, which is the preferred word, I believe.
Oh, is that the preferred word? I didn't know that.
The road, you need a road map, or you need a, and so what, you know, it's crazy that I mean, I think that we're even contemplating not having citizenship. What would that mean in essence? It means that you can't vote, and you can be thrown out of the country, or if you leave the country, you can be barred from coming back in. So the fact that we have the status called, you know, green card, which is legal permanent resident, well, permanent should nowhere be in that term because it's not permanent. You can be kicked out under our current laws. And so a lot of when you talk to people about immigrants, you hear the word integration. We want to integrate people into our society. Well, how do you integrate people if you're going to create a permanent underclass, a permanent second-class status? You know? And so the idea, and it's interesting if you compare America to Europe. I mean, Europe has always had, many European countries have had this second-class status and have barred, you know, certain sets of immigrants from becoming citizens. Meanwhile, they'll spend all this money on, like, you know, language programs and all these other programs to integrate their immigrants without letting them become citizens. And you can see country after country that have failed to integrate immigrants. Meanwhile, America, despite, you know, years of racist laws and all kinds of, you know, bad things that have happened, has been much more successful at integrating immigrants because they have been allowed to become a part of the electorate. They have ownership. And so, and as a lawyer, I can think of many, many crazy scenarios for people who are in this limbo status. But, you know, that aside, just aspirationally, to not have citizenship is crazy. Yeah.
Just very briefly, in terms of the Senate bill itself, I think that we have to acknowledge the fact that because of courageous undocumented youth leaders across the country leading the movement and sharing their stories and conducting civil disobedience action and hunger strike and do a lot of risking their lives, and that is why we're able to pass the Senate bill, we come this far, and so I think we should be proud of it. It's very historic, and we have to own it. But in terms of the citizenship status itself, I strongly believe that I think we need to have pathway of citizenship for all 11.5 million undocumented immigrants who are living in this country. And over 68% of registered voters agree that they will support immigration reform with an eventual citizenship. And a recent report from Pew Research Center said 90% of Latinos and 70% of Asian American adults would support immigration reform with an eventual citizenship. So it is clear that majority of people want immigration reform that includes a pathway of citizenship. At the same time, however, there's a same research from the Pew Research Center. The survey said that the Latino and Asian American adults would prioritize administrative relief from deportations over a pathway of citizenship. So with that in mind, I think what we need to do is continue to pressure President Obama to expand deferred action for childhood arrivals for all. And in the meantime, we need to pressure Congress to pass a fair and humane comprehensive immigration reform. We cannot just solely focus on Congress or solely focus on President Obama. I think we need to pressure both. And this year, I think we have a strong chance to expand DACA for certain individuals, and I think we do have a strong chance to pass sort of a piecemeal approach to help our community.
Thank you, and I mean, we can all agree we're definitely not asking for too much. I mean, any kind of immigration reform or solution to our broken immigration system should have a pathway or roadmap to citizenship. And I think we just need to be, like you mentioned, very careful with the language that we're using. But I wanted to ask sort of this question about, you said, Jose Antonio, immigration reform is not about policy, and it is also not an issue that impacts only undocumented immigrants. It is clearly not only a Latino or Mexican issue, as we can see from our panelists today. So wanted to get Ju or Jose or Artie, your thoughts on why are APIs often left out of the immigration discussion, and you know, what has been your experience, and is this has it been challenging to engage the API community, Asian Pacific Islander community?
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that that I contextualize this right. Absolutely, it's a policy issue and that we need to focus on a bill. And what I'm saying is it's more than just a legislative battle, that it has to be more of like us liberating ourselves, right? One thing that I forgot to mention that I really wanted to mention is, as somebody who used to live in DC and used to be a part of that fishbowl thing, I find that even the immigration groups and some of the leaders, some of whom I really respect, I think they really need to make room for more of us. You know, when you follow the money and when you follow kind of who's in charge of what's happening, I find that the dreamers, right, and even the parents of the dreamers that have gotten more involved, they need to be, you know, in the table more, and not just kind of on the menu. I think that's really, really important. Especially because, and again, I'm speaking as somebody who, you know, was a political reporter. We cannot be beholden to a single party. We cannot. Part of the reason why, you know, it's comfortable for some Republicans to say that they want legalization and not citizenship is because they fear, quotation marks, fear, that what's going to happen is they're going to make all of us citizens and then we vote Democrat, right? I don't know, have you all seen Lincoln, the movie? I highly, highly suggest it. The same party that, you know, freed the slaves, the Republican Party, right? There's nothing more constant in American democracy than taxes and parties. And liberating ourselves even from that, I think, is really, really important. So now to your question, the API community. So I'm Filipino, and in Tagalog, we call undocumented people TNT, which means tago ng tago, which means hiding in hiding. I think that's about tells you how we feel about this whole thing. And I think, and Ju, please, you know, RT, like, I just think there's a lot of, I remember being in Austin, actually, at the college there, and this Korean woman, undocumented Korean woman, got up at the end of my little thing, and she just, like, cried, and I'm like, okay, calm down. And then she went off about what it's like to be Korean and her parents and how her parents never wanted her to even talk about this. Just get married, you know, just the pressure that a lot of the shame, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of even kind of delusion, I think. And of course, that's not the province of API people, but I think it is a little more pronounced to some extent because we haven't been, if you look at the history of immigrant rights in America, the Latino community, right, has always been part of, their political kind of consciousness. For Asian people, it hasn't really been that way, although, of course, the Asian, Chinese Exclusion Act and what happened to the Japanese Americans and internment, for some reason, it just hasn't connected that way, and I don't really know why. If you all have an answer, that would be great.
Well, part of it is that, the big Asian immigration didn't happen till post-1965.
Yep.
And so the numbers that were here before that were really small. Part of it is cultural, I think what you're talking about, which is shameful. You're not supposed to share things that are negative or could be perceived as negative across Asian cultures. Part of it is numbers. The number, the share of the undocumented population, I think it's like 75% Latino and smaller, maybe, I don't know what percent is Asian, maybe 10.
Of the undocumented population?
Yeah, 10.
I think, what was that? 1.3 million. 1.3 out of the 11.5.
Right, so that's 10%. So anyway, it's also not only internal, but it's external. Who is the undocumented person that is portrayed in the media, that's, in the mind of someone, this idea of even just Mexicans, who is, just saying that word, and you play a word association game and you see what people come out with. And so I think it goes both ways. There's also an external perception. But I think it's changing. I mean, it really has been changing in the past few years.
Yeah.
And so if, Juve, you can also expand on what have been some of the strategies maybe that have proven to be successful in engaging in the API community.
For the record, I have to say Jose Antonio Vargas' name sounds Latino, but he's actually Asian.
Thank you, Drew, for reminding them that.
Yeah, just want to let you know.
All Asian panel.
Asian parents. Well,
only in Berkeley. Can you
only in
have
Berkeley.
all Asian?
There we go.
Just kidding.
I've been saying this over and over again. Immigration issue is not only a Latino issue. It is also affecting Asian American community, and it is a human rights issue. And right now, there are about 11.5 million undocumented immigrants are living in this country, and among them, 1.3 million undocumented immigrants are coming from Asia, and 1 out of 7 Korean immigrants are undocumented. 1 out of 7 Korean immigrants are undocumented, and now we are the largest of new immigrants coming to this country. And so Asian American communities cannot ignore about this issue. And we need to start to have a constructive dialogue around immigration. And I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about sharing our personal experiences and find common values and common ground and work together to fix our broken immigration system. And that needs to be done as soon as possible. And I think that once we truly understand the broader context of immigration issues, I strongly believe that we will open up and change people's mind and attitude towards undocumented immigrants. And I believe the day will come. We just need to continue to engage with our own community. And to answer your questions in regards to whether API are left out and why, and I think it's because of, I think the mainstream media is really perpetrating this immigration issues as a Latino issue thing only. And so I think we need to figure out ways to break that stereotype, and that's why I'm very proud of the fact that Jose Antonio Vargas really, inspiring thousands of undocumented immigrant communities, particularly API undocumented immigrant youth. And I'm glad the fact that there's a lot of API undocumented immigrant youth that are taking their further step to share their stories in their own community. And the bigger question that we need to tackle is how can we go about engage with the Asian American community? Because like they said, there's a lot of cultural stigma and social discrimination within our own community. That is why we have a lack of visibility and lack of support system. But I think we are changing. The things are changing, and now we have dozens of API undocumented leaders charging and claiming themselves they're undocumented and unafraid and unapologetic and sharing their stories and taking courage to blocking ICE buses, sharing stories and contacting elected officials. And thank you. conduct civil disobedience action. Lastly, I want to say that why it has been changed, I think it's because of role models like Jose Vargas and role models like Tam Tran. And I think we need more role models who we could look up to and can be related to. And I think I'm very optimistic that we will continue to grow and more API immigrants will come out and share their stories, and we will make a positive difference.
I just have one last note, and I think it's a generational thing. I think the parents of dreamers who are Asian are the ones who need the most outreach, yes. and they need outreach from their peers, not necessarily, they don't, it's not that they don't respect their children, but they respect, people in authority more. And so that is something that I think has to be targeted. So, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point.
Let me just add really something real quick. Oh, Ju, I'm not a role model. I'm just freeing myself. I think we all are in our own extent, but thank you for that. But I just wanted to add that to your point, Artie, the real uncomfortable conversation starts with our aunts and our uncles and our grandparents, right? Like, so I'm part of one of those mixed status families. And ever since Ronald Reagan danced with Imelda Marcos, Filipinos have voted Republican. I don't know how this happened, but it just happened, right? And, I have had some really uncomfortable conversations with my own family members about not just that there's more to being a successful Filipino in America than owning a nice house and driving a car, but you also have to vote. It means being active civic participants. I mean, it is astounding to me, as I've traveled around the country, just how many, documented American citizen eligible to vote, Asian and Latino people are not being engaged. I think if anything, especially because we are approaching 2 election years, right? There's been some of this happening, but it'd be fascinating if the undocumented community are the ones that say to our documented cousins and nephews and nieces, please do not take your privilege of voting for granted, right? I think we need to be the ones that help do that. And I gotta tell you, like, this is looking at the earthquake, the political earthquake that the demography is giving us. If we do not get organized now in terms of registering to vote, in terms of getting people involved, we are gonna be looking at, a storm in the next 2 decades, just because of how things are looking, redistricting. But yeah, please talk to your grandparents and talk to your aunts and talk to your, uncles.
And unfortunately, you guys are amazing speakers they're cutting off our timing. So we're past 5 and I failed my responsibility to get you out in time. But I really want to thank our panelists. If you can please join me in thanking them for being here.
So we should definitely